Hi everyone. So this video is for Lecture 1, Part 1. And in this video we will cover what is physiology, how the body is organized, the basic functions of our cells, what is homeostasis, and what are the body fluid components. So you can find this PowerPoint for Lecture 1 for both Parts 1 and 2 on your Canvas shell, and it's in the first week module. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so like I said, we're going to learn what is physiology. So you're taking this class in order to learn how the body functions. Okay, that's what physiology means. It is the function of the body. But in order to understand how the body functions, we also have to understand how it is structured. Okay, that's anatomy. In anatomy, you learn the structure of the body, how things are put together, what the shapes of things are. All of those things matter in order to determine how it's going to function. Okay, so that's what we mean by physiological mechanisms are possible through structural design. Now, don't worry, if you haven't taken anatomy yet, you should be able to do fine in this course. You might have to do a little bit of background review, but it's best if you have taken anatomy first. Okay, um, this relationship between anatomy and physiology is oftentimes what we describe as structure determines function. Okay, again, that relationship means whatever how a specific organ or even a cell is actually um, structured, what its shape is, what are the different little bumps and grooves on it, that kind of thing. That determines its structure. So I've got two examples here on the slide for you. Okay, so think of your heart. The heart's job is to receive the blood that's coming from your veins and to pump it out through your arteries. Okay, the blood it's receiving from the veins is deoxygenated blood. The blood it's pumping out to your arteries is oxygenated blood. So it's the structure of the heart that can separate those two types of blood, the deoxygenated from the oxygenated blood. It's important to do that because you don't want to send deoxygenated blood to all your cells. The point of that is to get your cells the oxygen that it needs. So that structure is determining that function. Okay. And in order to push the blood, it needs to be able to create a pressure to do that. So in the structure of the heart is a type of muscle called cardiac muscle, and that cardiac muscle can contract, putting pressure on the fluid inside of it in order to push it out through your arteries. Okay, so that structure is determining the function of that organ. Okay, teeth. Teeth are a really good example if you're still not getting this concept, because we all, look at your teeth and you can see that our teeth, we have different shapes to them, and that's because it processes different types of food different ways. So think about when you eat an apple. How do you approach your mouth with the apple? You approach it right in the front so that it hits your incisors, top and bottom. Those are really flat but sharp teeth, right? They act like a shearing, like a scissors would. And so you can shear off a piece of food by doing that. Okay? It's hard to approach an apple from other parts of your teeth because they're not designed for that type of food. Okay, if you remember back when you were a kid and you lost your two front teeth, it was really hard eating apples, wasn't it? Alrighty. Now think of the next teeth, these ones that are kind of pointed. These are your canines, or oftentimes in humans we call them bicuspids. So if you like to eat chicken, think about when you grab a drumstick, you're not nibbling it from the front with your incisors. No, you grab it to the side and you hook it on those canines, and so you can tear. That's what canines are for, tearing and slashing. So you tear off that piece of meat. Okay, now whether it's the apple or the chicken, you need to grind it down into a mushy pulp so you can swallow it, right? That's where you use your back teeth, your molars. Your molars, take a look in the mirror. They're big, flat teeth. Excellent. So when they come together, they mash and they grind food into a pulp. And that's what you want to be able to swallow it down. So structure determines function. Okay. So what we're going to see is that our cells oftentimes have a different structure because they're going to perform a different function within that organ system that provides a different function. Okay, so we'll see that in a minute. So in order to actually further understand how structure and function interact, we need to understand how our bodies are organized. So I just kind of mentioned cells and organ systems, right? That's how our bodies are organized. This is our bodies are organized in a hierarchy. It goes from the smallest components to the largest component, which is you, the organism. Okay, so let me start with the second main bullet that you see on there, the cellular level. I wanted to start there because the cell is considered the smallest component of your body that we considered alive. A cell can be alive. So that's why we say it's the basic unit of life. Okay, but to create that cell, we need smaller components. We need chemicals. It starts with the atom, that's the smallest unit, and atoms interact to form molecules. Molecules interact to form macromolecules, which form the chemicals that then form our cells. Okay, so if you think back to general biology, you learned that the components of the cell membrane, one of the main things it's made out of is a phospholipid. That's a molecule. So it's all these phospholipids together, and they make up the cell membrane. Now, the cell membrane by itself isn't alive, is it? No. Okay, but the cell membrane, along with the other organelles, which are made up of molecules and other components inside of the cell, they now can interact with one another and do work, and that's what makes a live cell, that whole thing packaged together. But we can go further. Now, cells can actually group up and form tissues. So those of you who have had anatomy, you'll recall there's 4 main tissue types, right? There's epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues are composed out of epithelial cells that group up together to form this long, broad, flat tissue. Okay, there's connective tissue that has a different type of cells, along with protein fibers and things, and that forms a tissue that functions differently than epithelial tissue does, right? Muscle tissue, those are formed from different types of muscle cells. Nerve tissue is formed from neurons and other types of cells. So each of those 4 tissues, you can imagine, I mean, if you didn't have anatomy, you know what muscle is and nerves are, right? So you can imagine that those are very different types of functions. Okay. One thing about physiology to remember as you're studying throughout this semester, physiology is about you. So always kind of relate back to what you know. What do you know already? I think you're all pretty well aware of your skeletal muscles, right? You talk about maybe you have nerve pain, so that those are going to be different tissues. So think about that, right? Okay, so to continue, those 4 main tissue types, they can now interact in order to form an organ. Okay, so let's use the stomach, for example. The inner lining of the stomach, the very inside, is epithelial tissue. Okay, if we go the layer outside of that, that's connective tissue. And then infused within the connective tissue, nerves run through there. Okay, the layer outside of that is smooth muscle. And then the layer outside of that is a real thin layer of epithelial tissue again. So we got all 4 tissue types in there. All your organs have all 4 tissue types. Okay, but they're arranged in a different way, and they might have different specializations, and that's what makes the organ function differently. The structure is determining the function. Okay, so we know the stomach is there to help initiate digestion, break down nutrients, so that we can get those nutrients to our cells. But what good is the stomach if you don't have the esophagus, which is also attached to your mouth? Because we get nutrients from the external environment. So if we get nutrients from the external environment, we need to have a way to conduct it down to our stomach. So we do that through our mouth and our esophagus. So those are different organs that associate with the stomach. But the stomach digestion doesn't end there. Okay, digestion needs to continue through the small intestines. So the small intestines are attached to the stomach, where further digestion occurs, and where those nutrients then can be absorbed into the body so that it can get to all of our other cells in our body, even up all the way up to your brain, right? And then the waste product needs to leave via the large intestine, and then out the rectum and the anus. So what I just described from all those organs, I just described they're in series with one another, they're associated to one another. That is an organ system. I just described our digestive system. Right? But so I did mention that we absorb the nutrients that the digestive system helps to break down in small molecules so that it can get to all of our other cells. But how do they get there? Well, we need another organ system for that, and that's the cardiovascular system. And that might be referred to as the circulatory system. Okay, it's the same thing. Right? But that's where the nutrients enter into that system, which can then move it around to all the cells in our body. So there's two organ systems there. When our cells get those nutrients, they create waste. So we need to get rid of that waste. So the cardiovascular system might move it. If the waste product is carbon dioxide, it moves that to the respiratory system, where then we can exhale it, another organ system. There might be other waste like nitrogenous waste. So when that blood gets toward our kidneys can remove it and form urine, which gets stored in the bladder, and we release it through the urethra. That's another organ system, right? So we have a lot of different organ systems that interact with one another to create the organism that you are, right? There we go. So I mentioned 3 organ systems or 4 organ systems right there. You can see that there are several organ systems. We are actually going to go through each one of these organ systems. We're going to look at their structure, and oftentimes we'll look at it down at the cellular level so we can understand at the cellular level how they function. And then from there, we'll see how the organ functions and how the organ system functions, and then how you, the organism, then ultimately functions. Okay, easy. Trust me, we're going to step you through this. You're going to get it. Alrighty. So, as I mentioned, we're going to look at this at the cellular level. So we need to understand that every single cell in your body has just a basic function. Okay? They all need to do the things that I have listed on the slide here. They all need nutrients, and they all need oxygen. And us being animals, we can't make those things. Our cells cannot make nutrients. They cannot make oxygen. So we have to get it from the external environment. Okay. And again, so that's where our organ systems are going to kick in and do that. But we need those things in order to do chemical reactions, right? In order to make other products that our bodies might need. Okay. So that's the next one. We need to perform chemical reactions, and we do that at the cellular level within each of our organs. So they're going to have a specialized job of what kind of chemical reaction that they do. And the structure is going to determine that function. When these cells are doing work, right, they make waste. And some waste is in the form of carbon dioxide. So when cells make energy, remember from general bio, your cellular respiration, when cells make energy, they release carbon dioxide. So we need to be able to get rid of that, because if carbon dioxide builds up in our cells, it becomes toxic. And we're going to learn the actual chemical equation later in the semester, how that happens. Okay, and there's other waste products like ammonia and things like that. We need to get rid of that. That makes the environment in the cell toxic, and it would inhibit these chemical reactions it needs to do. So we need to get rid of it. Okay, the cells that are when they're doing work, they do work inside our organelles. Remember the mitochondria and the endoplasmic reticulum and things. Well, over time, as they do work, they wear out. They actually peter out, they wear out, and we have to create new ones. So we need to synthesize the needed cellular components and create new ones. Okay, so that's also then why we need those nutrients and other things, so we can make the building blocks in order to make the structures inside of our cells to perform the functions that they do. Okay. So I've been mentioning often now, we're going to take things from the external environment and bring them inside of our cells. And then when those waste products are created, we're going to move them outside of the cells. That is what, when I say that, I'm talking about exchanging materials. I'm exchanging waste products out for good products in. Good meaning things we need, oxygen, nutrients, things like that. Right? And the cell can control that. So we'll actually look in lecture 2 on cell physiology, how that happens. But you learned most of that already in general biology. So you might want to crack open your old general biology notes. In science, you always keep your notes until like 5 years after you graduate. I don't know. But you keep them because you can refer back to them. Okay, so this means in the surrounding environment, that means we're going to have to control what's in our surrounding environment. That'll be coming up in a minute. Okay, if we're dependent on what's in the surrounding environment, our cells need to be able to sense and respond to any changes that occur in our surrounding environment. Okay, so we'll learn how to do that. And then just like I said, the cell organelles wear out, so do our cells. Our cells themselves wear out. So we have cellular death. Before that happens, we want cells to reproduce. So we do have a way, as we're losing cells, we can replace cells, and we keep going. We can't do it forever. We all know that. We are mortal beings, but we can keep going, right? So basically what we're doing when we're controlling what's going into the cell and what's going out of the cell, okay, and we're maintaining an environment to be able to keep that exchange going. When that exchange doesn't occur, that's when we get sick. Okay, so we have to keep that exchange going. When we do that, that's what we're doing with homeostasis. We're maintaining what's inside and outside of the cell through a process referred to as homeostasis. Okay. The specific definition for homeostasis is written right there for you. Maintenance of a relatively stable internal environment. Relatively stable. So what I mean is your cell, we said over and over again, it needs oxygen. So instead of bringing oxygen in and then depleting it and waiting for more oxygen to come, what we continuously do is make sure oxygen is available, and we hold oxygen in the cell or in the immediate surrounding area at a certain level. And then if we fall a little bit below that level, it doesn't take much sometimes, our other organ systems kick in to replace that oxygen. Like the respiratory system, you might breathe a little harder. Okay? So that's what I mean, a relatively stable internal environment. It doesn't mean that if I need 30 micrograms of oxygen to survive and it goes to 29 that I'm dead. No, when it goes to 29, 28, 27, again, my respiratory system's going to kick in to bring those oxygen levels back up so I can maintain homeostasis, a relatively stable internal environment. Okay. By the way, those numbers are fake. I just made them up just for effect. So don't worry about those absolute numbers. They mean nothing. It's just the idea of a level of oxygen that's required. Okay. So doing that with oxygen, nutrients, water, anything else we can think of, and I'll go through a list in the part 2 of this lecture. That's what we're maintaining by homeostasis. And that is what is essential for the survival and function of all cells. That definition right there, essential for survival and function of all cells, that is not what homeostasis is. That is what it does. Okay? It keeps our cells living and being able to function. Okay? And now, how do we maintain that homeostasis? Every single cell is doing it. Every single cell is doing its own part in order to do that. Okay? All right, so how do we maintain homeostasis? So I keep talking about exchange. Okay, this is really actually a good, I've got, can I point up here? Yeah, I've got the earth right there. That's a, that's a nice little graphic. Because in order to exchange materials from the inside of the cell and outside of the cell back and forth, we need water to do it. Earth is our watery planet when we do that. Okay, so now I want you to imagine back to general bio. And you guys were given a jar of pond water, and you were asked to put some pond water on a slide. And when you did, you saw all these single-celled organisms. You saw paramecium and glena and amoeba, right? You saw all of those guys. You might remember stentor. Those are single-celled organisms. Those are alive, and they exist as one single cell. We're multicellular. They exist as one single cell. Okay. And what they're doing is they're maintaining homeostasis because all their nutrients are in the pond water surrounding them. Or you can also imagine for the organisms that live in the ocean, it's in the ocean water surrounding them. Okay? And so it's very easy to exchange materials. You need the water to do that. We live on dry land. So we can't just get oxygen from the air, right? That's dry and we won't be able to move it across our cell membrane. We need water to do that. Okay? You get a cough when your throat gets dry, don't you? Okay? So all types of exchange require water to do it. Okay? So what did we do as dry land organisms, as organisms moved out of the ocean and moved onto land? Our bodies changed and created their own body fluid compartments. Okay, so we need to understand something about the structure of our bodies from the point of view of these different compartments of fluid that we have. Okay, fluid, again, is the important word here. We have to have water because that water is going to contain all the nutrients and oxygen and salts and everything else that our cells need. Okay, and then our cells are going to be able to take the waste that's inside of it and move it outside into that watery environment. The watery environment then is going to move around our body and take it to the organ systems that can help get rid of those waste products. Okay, so we created a watery environment inside our body. Our body is mostly composed of water. Okay, so there's really two main compartments. There's either water or fluid inside of your cells, or there's water outside of your cells. Okay, so if it's inside of your cells, that's intracellular fluid, ICF. Intra refers to the inside. Okay, cellular, inside the cell. So it's fluid inside the cell. So if you remember from general bio, that's your cytoplasm. Okay, all the other water outside of your cells are fluid because it's not going to just be pure water. It's going to contain other things. All of that's contained outside of the cell membranes, that's the extracellular fluid. Extra meaning outside of, not more, but outside of. Okay, outside of the cell, cellular fluid. So we can abbreviate those as ECF for extracellular fluid and ICF for intracellular fluid. So you'll see those abbreviations used a lot. Okay. Now, with the extracellular fluid, though, we actually contain two separate compartments. Okay, not every organism has this, but we do. Some of the complex are what we call a closed circulatory system. Okay, so we contain our blood inside of our blood vessels. And the fluid portion of our blood is the plasma, right? Blood is the plasma and your red blood cells and your white blood cells and other components. So just the fluid part is the plasma, and that's contained within your arteries and your veins. Okay? But then there's fluid that just are outside of your arteries and veins, and they're outside of your cells. That's called interstitial fluid. It's mostly connected with your connective tissue. It's the fluid with your connective tissue. Okay? But so here I've got a graphic that gives that illustration of those different compartments. So you see the cell there, and anything inside of the circle, right? The circle in the middle is the nucleus that also has fluid in it, but it's all inside of the cell, so that's the intracellular fluid, ICF. And again, from general bio, you learn that's called cytoplasm or cytosol. Cytosol is the actual fluid. We call it cytoplasm because of the organelles that float around in there. So it's all floating in there. Okay. Outside of the cell, you see the blue part. That's the interstitial fluid. Okay, I think I didn't mention this on the previous slide. So that fluid, the interstitial fluid, is also outside of the cell, so it's an extracellular fluid, but we refer to it as interstitial fluid, between the cells. That's what interstitial means, between the cells. Okay, and then that red column, that's actually indicating a blood vessel. That's like your artery or your vein. So again, that contains the blood, and the fluid portion of that is plasma. That is outside of your cells, so that's an extracellular fluid, but we call it plasma. Okay, so you're sitting there going, well, if I talk about ECF, how do I know if we're talking about interstitial fluid or plasma? Well, physiologists, biologists, when we want to talk about plasma, we say plasma. Okay. If we say extracellular fluid, ECF, or we say interstitial fluid, we mean one or the other. Okay. So if we say ECF, it technically can mean plasma, but we're probably not talking about plasma because we'll say plasma when we mean it. Okay, but you'll see interstitial fluid and ECF being exchanged a lot. So you say those are the little details you got to keep straight in your mind because you can get caught up on that stuff as you're learning physiology. Okay, so you want to pay attention to that. So now when you look at this graphic, it looks like there's a pool of intracellular fluid that's separate from the interstitial fluid, that's completely separate from the blood, right? That there's just stagnant pieces of water. No, to get exchange of materials from the cell to the interstitial fluid to the plasma and back, those fluids have to connect to one another. They have to flow between one another because we've been talking about nutrients go into the blood vessel and the blood vessel will bring the nutrients to the cell. So it has to have a way to get into the cell. Well, the cell membranes that make up the cell and the cells that make up the blood vessels, they're porous. So fluid leaks out of them, and that's what this graphic shows. So your heart's going to pump plasma around. Plasma's carrying the nutrients and the oxygen, right? When it gets to your organs, it's going to release those nutrients and oxygen things because those capillaries that are the blood vessels next to those cells, they're really porous. They're leaky. So it's going to leak out and into the interstitial fluid. And from there, it's going to leak into the cells. It's going to cross the cell membrane of the cell. And then that cell has been doing work, so it's creating waste, CO2 and other waste, and that's going to move out into the interstitial fluid and move into the blood vessel, into the plasma. So again, that can bring that waste to another organ system to get rid of it, right? How does it know? It's all about principles of diffusion and osmosis, and you learn about that in general bio. So it's a good thing to review, and it's so important in physiology. We're actually going to review that in lecture 2. Okay, so keep these body compartments, fluid compartments straight. Plasma, interstitial fluid, both of those are ECF, extracellular fluid, and intracellular fluid, or cytoplasm, so that's inside of the cell. So this is all fluid that can exchange nutrients in and out. Okay, very important. Okay, and that's what our planet is based on, is the exchange of fluids. And so oh good, I was happy. I don't have control over which planets pop up. And so there's actually the Earth above my Earth. That's why we call it the blue planet. We are based on water. Water exchanges everything. Okay, so even you think you're in dry air, there's water vapor in there that's carrying materials, good things and bad things. That's what the pollution is attaching to, right? When it rains and water hits the ground and goes into our rivers and our oceans, it evaporates and goes back up into the clouds. That's all water vapor. So we have this exchange of water. When we humans look for life on other planets, we look for water, number one. And if we find water, there's a good shot that there is or there was life on that planet. That's life as we know it. Might take somebody to think outside of the box to see a different form of life that we have no concept of. But right now, that's what we know and that's what we look for. That's why scientists get really excited when they find what looks like dried up riverbeds on a planet, that planet may have had water at some point. Okay, so the next slide, let me just kind of tie all of this back together for you. Okay, so our body systems, all our organ systems and things that create you, the organism, they work to maintain homeostasis. So they do digestion, they get rid of waste, they pump blood, they do all of that to maintain homeostasis. because homeostasis is essential for the survival of the cells. It's bringing those nutrients and other items, salts, whatever, that the cell needs, and it's taking those things away. So that happens at the cellular level, right? But the cells do that because they're all associated. They form tissues and they form organs to make the organ systems, which make up our body systems. So they're the ones that are at the macro level performing this function of bringing oxygen in, taking CO2 out, right? Bringing food in, letting the waste go, the part of the food we couldn't use, right? All those different types of things. They're doing that to maintain homeostasis. You can see the circular event here. Okay, so that's the end of part one. I didn't want to make this video too long, so that's the end of part one. I'm going to then record part two of the video, which will get into, dive deeper into homeostasis. Not only what it is, but how we maintain it through feedback systems. So that'll be the next one. Thank you, guys.